evening. I'm going to go ahead and get this started so that we're not here too late this evening. Good to see you all here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for leaving the front and center row table vacant entirely. If anybody does want to sit there, you are welcome to. Thank you. I knew somebody would take me up on that. But thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody online. I get asked more about these events for online than in person because people don't like to go out on Sunday night before the week starts, apparently. But you are the faithful, you are the few, you are the committed. You are not Marines, most of you, but you are very appreciated for being here. So I'm not going to take too much time before I just kick things off because there's a lot to cover. I am going to pray, and then we'll get into the topic for the evening. Father God, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for the confidence we can have that you are real, that you are who you say you are, the confidence we can have in your word. I pray that we would grow in our commitment to you through this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let me tell you just briefly the premise for what I'm going to be doing tonight, talking about the existence of God. And Mason, I hate to complain, but if the back screen can be the front screen at some point, that would be easier. The premise that I'm going to be functioning on is not very drawn out, in-depth, slow-paced presentation. What I'm trying to do is take about probably a 30-hour class that I teach as a life group and try to condense it into 50 to 55 minutes. And so we're going to be moving quickly. There will be a time for discussion afterwards. If there's something that you would like more information on, if there's a point of disagreement, you're welcome to bring that up in the question and answer time. But I am going to be rushing through many of the evidences for the existence of God. At times, you could just talk about one of these for hours and hours, and for every topic on here, I have somewhere between 3 and 10 hours of classes where we actually dive into it in a lot more detail, look at the responses that an atheist, an agnostic, or someone of a different religion might give, and then give the rebuttal to those responses. So again, in the Q&A, you're welcome to ask whatever questions, but this topic is meant to address the evidence for God's existence. How do we prove that God is real? And then on Thursday, I am going to tell you we have a group starting Thursday night at 6 o'clock. And that will last for about 6 months, and that's going to be on world religions and why I believe that Christianity is the true religion and has the true God, as opposed to something like Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, any of the other major belief systems that are out there. So we are looking at evidence specifically for the God of the Bible. I am not looking at a generic argument for some force. I am not looking to prove the Hindu idea of Brahman. I am looking at the evidence for a God as described in the Bible. Now, if I were to ask people what their faith is based on, if I were to ask, why do you believe in God, the most common response that people are going to give fall into two categories. Either I believe in God because I was raised that way, or I believe in God because insert whatever experience you had with God. And one of those is a poor answer, and one of those is an incomplete answer, is what I'm going to say. The idea that you have reason to believe in God because your parents believed in God, it's great that your parents believed in God, and it's hopefully true that they taught you about God. Those are great things, but just because your parents believe in God doesn't mean God exists. That's obviously not proof of God's existence. The Muslim child, their parents believe in a completely different God. The Buddhist child, their parents believe in a completely different idea of God, or a Hindu, completely different idea of God. So that doesn't prove what you believe. An atheist grows up in a house that doesn't believe in God. It has nothing to do with the actual reality of, is there a God? The second thing, you had an experience with God. I don't want to minimize whatever testimony you have of God working in your life. That's not the goal for tonight. However, I do want to just briefly bring to our attention that everybody in every religious system all over the world has their experience, has their reason for why they're a Muslim, or their reasons for why they're a Buddhist and how it gave them peace and it helped them get their life back together, the reason why they're in these different belief systems. And so while you very well may have an encounter with the living God, which if you're a Christian, I think you are serving the living God, the true God, we wouldn't want to use that alone as the reason why we know God exists, because that is subjective. It's just happened to us. There's no way for them to know based on your experience for sure if God's there. Nor does the existence of God depend on you or me. If all of us in this room were atheists, it would do nothing to deter the reality that God is there. Our experience has no bearing on the objective reality of if God exists. So I don't want to minimize testimonies. I don't want to make you feel bad if you're a Christian because your parents taught you it. That's a good thing for your parents to teach you the truth about God, but there has to reach a point where it's not just because your parents told you, right? It's because there are reasons to believe in God. So what we're going to do is look at the following topics. It's going to go quickly, and it's going to take about 57 minutes, okay? That's just my guess. We are going to look at the following arguments, the fifth of these arguments breaking down into three different categories. So the arguments are going to start broad. So when we look at something like the cosmological argument for the existence of God, it's a very broad argument for a very broad idea of God. So it's not specific to the triune God of the Bible, but it is specific to there has to be an all-powerful, eternal creator. And so we're going to look at some of the big picture arguments, the cosmological, the teleological. I skipped one called the ontological. If you know what the ontological argument is, you know why I'm skipping it. It's not because it's a bad argument, it's because it's just a confusing argument. Then we're going to do the axiological argument, that's the argument for morality. And then we're going to move into a few others. So instead of telling you what I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you it, okay? The cosmological argument for the existence of God. The cosmological argument really starts with Aristotle. It probably starts before Aristotle, but he made it popular, at least the initial concept of his prime mover. But then you have people like Aquinas, who comes along with his 5 proofs for the existence of God, and the first 2 of those 5 proofs are really ways of saying this argument. The argument has been updated. The argument is technically called the Kalam cosmological argument. It has 2 premises and a conclusion. Premise 1 is anything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2 is the universe began to exist. The conclusion would be the universe has a cause. All right? Basic, simple, deductive argument. If everything that begins to exist has a cause is true, and if the universe began to exist, if that's the case, then it necessarily means that the universe has a cause. And when you look at the cause and the kind of characteristics that cause would have, you can argue, and we will argue, that it requires what we mean when we say God. So let me look at this. Here's just the basic defense, right? And this is normally a 4-hour class, but this is just the basic defense. Premise 1 is the law of causality. If you go from a state of non-existence to a state of existence, there has to be a reason for the transition between those 2 states. Okay, now, the atheist response, there are like 4 different responses. The popular atheist responses fall into one of 2 categories. The first would be that the universe came from nothing, which is a very strange position to hold because there is nothing to cause it. But the universe came from nothingness, or the universe came from a series of other universes, which we have no particular evidence for, except that it is necessary to salvage some of the more atheistic perspectives, like, well, where does the universe come from? And then the next argument, which is actually, why is the universe so fine-tunedly designed the way it is? So I'll come back to multiverse in just a moment. But understand, there is no evidence, even if you've seen Marvel, there is no evidence for multiverse theory. Just because it's in a movie theater does not make it in reality. There is no evidence for multiverse, and there's certainly no evidence that nothing can cause things, because there's nothing to cause things, right? So the universe, or anything that begins to exist, just basic laws of causality would say there has to be a reason for that, unless the universe always existed. Some atheists, and this is a minority view at this point, but some atheists would say, look, everything that begins to exist does need a cause, but we disagree with premise 2. We disagree that the universe began. What if the universe has just always been here? What if the universe goes back infinitely in time? What if the universe never had a starting point? And so you have to respond to, did the universe, or has the universe always existed? Now, it is important to note, even in the atheistic field of philosophy or physics, not that that's its own field, but that mindset, this is not a majority view. The majority of atheists do not think the universe has always existed. But for those who might think that's the case, here are two things that you can tell them. First, infinity, while it works conceptually and in math, does not actually exist in reality, and struggles to exist in reality. Infinity is very helpful in many instances in mathematics, but in the actual world, there's nothing that's infinite. There's nothing that is truly infinite in the natural world. Let's imagine a scenario for a moment that the universe is actually eternal, never came about, has always been. And even though this wouldn't be the argument, it's an exercise in the absurdity of infinity, so go with me here. Let's imagine that it's existed in its current state throughout all of eternity, okay? The Earth has always been orbiting the sun, and so have the other planets. Earth orbits the sun every year, 365 days, right? Neptune orbits the sun how often? Anybody know the actual number? I don't. I mean, I know kind of it's high. Nobody knows the actual number. I'm just going to like ballpark this, okay? Maybe it's not this number, 100 years. Okay, it takes quite a while for Neptune, farthest out planet, once we kicked Pluto out. It takes a while for Neptune to go around the sun, right? So now imagine with me, this has been going on for all of eternity, okay? For infinite amounts of time, Earth has gone around the sun every year. How many times has it gone around the sun? No, I mean, if it's done it for infinity time, how many times has it gone around the sun? Infinity, right? An infinite number of times. How many times has Neptune? Same number, right? Even though it takes 200 times longer, whatever the number is, even though it takes way longer to go around, somehow it actually comes out to be infinity as well. Infinity struggles in reality. The problem of an infinite regression is this. If you say, for like multiverse, if you say, well, our universe came from another universe, okay, now we all know the next question, right? What's the next question? Where did it come from? And then a universe before that, and where did it come from? And a universe before that. And then, so the idea of infinity in reality seems impossible. Infinity doesn't function in the natural world. But the easier way to show that the universe is finite in age, it hasn't always been, is the finite amount of usable energy that the universe has. So the universe has a limited amount of fuel, essentially, and we're running out. And so if the universe was eternal, we would have ran out by now. Does that make sense? You can't just keep pouring something out of a cup for eternity. Eventually you run out if it's a limited size cup and you've been pouring it out at that rate for the whole time. And so we know that the universe had a beginning. Most atheists would agree the universe had a beginning. We know that the universe, if it has a beginning, needs a cause. And so that would be the first broad proof that there has to be a creator, something outside the universe that makes it. We'll get a little more specific. The teleological argument, telos from the Greek meaning purpose. So this is the argument from purpose and design. When you look at the universe, well, let me just lay out the argument first. Premise 1 just says fine-tuning and complexity requires a designer or creator. If something is intentionally fine-tuned and designed for a purpose, it requires some designer or mind behind it. Premise 2, the universe is fine-tuned and designed. Conclusion, the universe has a designer. So that's the argument from design. So if I showed you this, and I said, you know, it's really rare, but sometimes the wind patterns work out just right on the beach, that it happens to blow and it appears to say something. I mean, most people aren't buying that. But what if the waves, when the water came up, there was an elaborate sandcastle built by a kid, and as the waves come up, it channels them back in different ways, and it spells sand. Anybody buying this? Nobody's buying it still. Because there's some purpose to the markings, right? If it was just scribble, no nonsensical, but it's English, right? It's English, and it happens to be the English word for the item it's being written in. And the idea that that just randomly can happen and there's not design behind that is something that none of us would accept. So when you look at the universe, it turns out that there's quite a bit of design in the universe. There's quite a bit of fine-tuning. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a list to kind of kick it off and give you an idea of what we're talking about. So some of the large laws of the universe, the constants of the universe, are very fine-tuned to where if you were to change them, so like the cosmological constant, if you were to change it by, it's like 1 part in a billion. It's actually higher, but I don't want to say because I don't know how to pronounce those numbers. You don't have life. Okay? Life ceases to exist. Very, very specific in the strength that it's set to. You look at gravity. If gravity is too strong, you don't have a planet because it gets out of orbit. If gravity is too weak, you have the same problem. There's a tiny bit of wiggle room, but it's set ideally where it should be for a stable universe to exist. If you have let's see, protons and neutrons. Y'all know what protons and neutrons are, right? Yeah, they're part of atoms, okay? The other guy is, it could be a girl, I don't know. The other one is something else? Nope. Yeah, electron, thank you. Electrons, tiny compared to protons and neutrons. Protons and neutrons make up the nucleus. And there's a tiny size difference between protons and neutrons that is actually required for matter to be stable and exist in matter form. And so if something like that was just tweaked a little bit differently, you wouldn't have a universe. So those are kind of big picture things that happen to work out for our universe to be stable and allow an environment where galaxies can form or stars can exist or planets can exist. You look at planet Earth specifically, some of the things that come to mind that are very nicely placed. The oxygen levels on planet Earth. Now, you could change the oxygen levels. If you go a bit down, you're going to end up with some severe problems. But you could go a little bit down, right? We're a little lower in our oxygen than people at sea level, so you can fudge with the number a little bit, but not that much. You can't cut it in half, okay? Nor can you add a lot of oxygen. Now, you can temporarily add oxygen for yourself. You could increase oxygen by like 5 to 10%, and you would be okay, and I would be okay. But it turns out, as you increase the rate of oxygen in the atmosphere, something becomes far more difficult to control. Far more difficult to control. Anybody know what it is? Forest fires, yeah. If you were to double the oxygen in the atmosphere, you would never contain a forest fire again. Everything that gets lit would essentially burn until it's out of fuel with the amount of oxygen that would be there. So oxygen levels are ideal. Distance from the sun, right? Astronomers name it the Goldilocks zone, right? Not too hot, not too cold, just right, right? We don't freeze, we don't burn. Which is actually primarily due to our atmosphere, which happens to be fairly ideal. You can hear people on every side debating if the atmosphere is having problems right now, but go to Venus. If you want to know what it is to be really warm, Venus has an average temperature of somewhere between 700 and 800 degrees Fahrenheit, day or night, because the atmosphere is so thick. It's about 90 Earth atmospheres. So you don't want that. But you go to Mars, and Mars has a little bit of an exosphere, if memory serves, but not much else. Which means during the day on Mars, even though it's farther from the sun, it can actually get pretty warm. And do you know what happens at night? You freeze to death. You would burn every day, freeze every night. So distance from the sun combined with our atmosphere gives us the right condition. Moon-Earth tidal relationship. Without the moon, life's not possible, which is something a lot of people don't know. Without the moon, you wouldn't have life on planet Earth because the moon's responsible for the tides, and the tides are responsible for recycling gases into the ocean, which is responsible for producing the vast majority of the oxygen we use here on planet Earth. You take the moon away, you don't have life after a little while. Okay, the same day is not going to be a big deal. Well, I mean, if the moon vanished, it would probably be a big deal. We would probably be very concerned what happened, but you're not going to die from the oxygen issue right that day. Presence of water entirely, obviously required for life. The rotation of the Earth, you could speed up the rotation of the Earth a little bit. There's some evidence it used to be about 22 hours rotation from coral studies. You could slow it down 1 or 2 hours, but you can't do what Jupiter does and go around every 8 hours. That's not going to be stable for life. And you can't do what some other planets do and take 5 days to make that loop. Because when it's daytime for 72 hours, it gets warm, really warm. And when it's nighttime for 72 hours, it gets really warm as well. When you look at the design, it all seems to be centering on the ideal conditions for life to exist, specifically here on planet Earth. And so whatever the design is focused on human life, or life in general, but life on planet Earth is the focus. The universe seems built for us here on planet Earth. And we didn't even mention, nor am I going to, just for the sake of time, when you look at the argument from design, the amount of things that are in the microscopic world. Looking at cellular biology, looking at many of the cellular machinery, ribosomes, mitochondria, things that are required for life to exist, any form of life, at least that we know of, requires some very basic building blocks like DNA, ribosomes, and so we're not going to talk about any of that, but that also would be more evidence of design. So we have a universe that comes about that requires a designer, and that designer, which is required, seems to be focused in on Earth and life here on Earth. There seems to be some purpose behind it. Now, what you might not know is that this argument about design in the universe and it being designed for life is the primary reason multiverse theory was invented. The train of thought goes like this. the odds of all of these cosmological, the cosmological constant, the laws that govern the universe, the details around planet Earth, the odds of all of that lining up for life to be able to exist seems extremely absurd if it's kind of a random chance process. If there's no mind and intelligence and design behind it, it seems basically infinitely unlikely that it's going to line up that way unless our universe is one of an infinite number of universes. And then one of them's bound to line up because there's an infinite number of universes. So when there's an infinite number of universes, something that seems infinitely impossible becomes possible now, and that's us because we're here, so obviously it happened. And so the reason why multiverse came about was actually as a response to the teleological argument of design. And so keep that in mind. It is not based on, oh man, we looked into space and we saw another unit. That's not a thing. Most people probably believe in multiverse because of science fiction movies, but the actual evidence is lacking, we'll say that. Axiological argument. This one will seem a little more familiar to you, okay? This is the argument for the existence of God from morality. Now, typically, experience and feelings are not a guide for what is true or false, right? And that would still be the case. Just because I feel something doesn't make it true. Yes? This is a hard sell in our culture today, okay? That used to be obvious. That is not obvious to a lot of people these days. Just because I think something is true, just because I feel a certain way, doesn't make that correspond to reality. Reality is that which is, whether or not I feel like it is. So you look at this idea of morality. So the biblical position on morality is that God has written his law on our hearts, that all people made in the image of God have an idea of what is right or what is wrong, and that's Romans 2 where it talks about that, and that what we do often is we suppress that truth. We know the moral law, we know certain things are right or wrong, and we choose to ignore that at times and try to distort and bend and twist that. But the biblical position would be God wrote his law on our hearts. And while, sinners can suppress the truth at times, some things are really hard to suppress. I'm not saying nobody's done it, but some things are very hard to suppress and deny are wrong. Now, when we talk about morality, it's hard to have this conversation without bringing up some very specific events in history. And people often complain in Q&A. You can do it, don't worry. If you want to complain, you can. Often complain in Q&A that I'm using extreme examples. That's the entire point, okay? The quest I'm on right now is to prove to you that there are certain things, not everything, but there are certain things that are always right or always wrong. And the way I'm going to prove that is not by taking some gray area. It's going to be by taking the extremes that pretty much everybody agrees on being the case. So when you're looking at the idea of right and wrong, right, really the top left picture suffices. You don't really need any other photos. But let's talk Holocaust, okay? If you have Jewish children being put in ovens to exterminate them, is it wrong? Right? It's a simple question, and pretty much everybody you talk to, all right, pretty much everybody you talk to is going to agree that's wrong. There's always the few exceptions who will be true, honest, consistent atheists and say, well, I can't say it's wrong, but I can say I wouldn't do it. Okay? And I've talked to some of those people on the streets, and it's an interesting conversation. But here's the train of thought. Is there a place where it is right to put Jewish children, or any children, in ovens and kill them? Okay, is there a time in history when it's right? Can you go to the moon in 100 years and it becomes good? So The point is, it's not based on location. It's not based on when in history. There are some things that I am arguing are universally just wrong. And the issue is, you don't get universal right and wrong without some universal law in place by which these things are based on. You don't get a law that says it is wrong to murder without some standard, and the standard has to be outside of the universe and us, because if it doesn't change with location, it doesn't change with time, it is an eternal, consistent standard that applies to all people throughout all time. It has to be above and beyond the subjective individual. It has to be an objective, outside of us rule. And so now you need a universal moral law. If you're a relativist, is what it would more commonly be called. If you're a relativist and believe that you decide what is right and wrong for yourself, the consistent answer, if I say, was Hitler wrong, must be, I think he was wrong. And if I say, but was he wrong, period? It's not even a question you can engage with, because in the atheist view, there's nothing to say wrong, period, based on except your own feelings or your own point of view or whatever culture you grew up in decides it for you. The only way for Hitler to be absolutely wrong in all places at all time, what if everybody in the world thought Hitler was right? Is he right? So subjective morality would say, yeah, I mean, according to everybody, he's right. Objective reality would say, if everybody in the world, period, thought he was right, he's still wrong if it's wrong. Because right and wrong is something outside of us. And so the moral argument goes something like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. So if there is no God, there is no objective, outside of us, moral values or a moral law that would exist. Premise 2, objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists. So why then is God the only possibility? You know, when I was doing one ethics class 10, 12 years ago, it was really hard to explain this to people because truly understanding what an objective standard is very difficult when you've been raised in a relative world, okay? When you've been raised that, well, you get to decide what's right and wrong, apparently it's really hard to understand this point. So why do we need this standard? Because there are certain things that are right and wrong, whether or not we feel like they are or agree that they are or what a culture says. There are some things that are just wrong. And most people actually agree with that. They just contradict what position they have to do so. But now, why does this have to be God who decides? And the best argument I've heard about this is that morality is always and only concerned in its effect with personhood. What that means is you do not care if a rock breaks unless it affects a person. Okay? There is no right or wrong until it affects a person. It is not right or wrong for a boulder to fall off a mountain and crush a tree. It's not right or wrong, it just is. It's only when one person pushes the boulder and another person is in the tree that it becomes a problem, because now people are involved. And so if in the effect of morality it is always concerning persons, it seems very strange to say in the cause it is personless, because the effect would follow the cause. So the cause of morality must be a person in order for the effects to only be concerned with persons. And so just a basic cause and effect argument would be one reason why God is the only possible standard. God becomes the standard for what is right or wrong. And then you get into the most popular argument against Christianity, which is, anyone know? Number one argument used against God. Yeah, problem of evil, right? That's the number one. There are really two arguments against God. The argument from evil and the argument from non-necessity. So if you think everything can be explained without God, you set him aside. That's one argument. And then the problem of evil. Those are the two main arguments that have been presented as evidence against the existence of God. So the problem of evil, I'm sure you've all heard of the problem of evil, right? If God is a loving, powerful God, why would he allow, and then insert whatever injustice you'd like? And there are a lot of them, right? Some 3 million babies die every year within the first couple months of being born. There's a lot of injustices, right? There are a lot of bad things that take place. David Hume, atheist, philosopher, he said, were a stranger to drop suddenly into this world, I would show him as a specimen of its ills, a hospital full of diseases, a prison crowded with malefactors and debtors, a field strewn with carcasses, a fleet floundering in the ocean, a nation languishing under tyranny, famine, or pestilence. Honestly, I don't see how you can possibly square with an ultimate purpose of love. How do you look around the world and say, loving God? So Epicurus originally proposed this argument 2,300-ish years ago. And he just said, here's the dilemma, right? Is God all-powerful and all-loving? Well, if he is all-powerful and all-loving, he would stop evil, okay? That was his conclusion. An all-powerful God would be able to stop evil, and an all-loving God would want to stop evil, okay? Which means if there's still evil, that God is not real. So God could be all-loving but not all-powerful, but then why are you calling him God if he's not all-powerful? Or he could be all-powerful but not all-loving, but then why would you worship him if he's just an evil God? Or he's neither, in which case you don't have God again. Y'all follow the argument? Yes? There's a nice chart. Okay. Camus, he said, it is not science that has led me to doubt the purpose of God. It is the state of the world. It is the pitiful, unending struggle for existence among the nations. It is the collapse of our idealism before the brute facts of force and chaos. It is the feeling that there is something demonic in the hearts of things which is working against us, that there is a radical twist in the very constitution of the universe which will always defeat man's hopes, make havoc of his dreams, and bring his pathetic optimism crashing in disaster. Purpose, look at the world that settles it. You know, interesting enough, part of that is right. Part of that is right. It feels like there's something demonic in the hearts of things which is working against us, that there is a radical twist in the very constitution of the universe which will always defeat man's hope. That, to an extent, is actually right according to the Bible. That the universe, as it is right now, is cursed and fallen. And so it actually makes sense in a biblical worldview, but let me give a more detailed response. First problem, if you were to ask Epicurus, all right, evil disproves God. Define evil. I feel like that's a lacking point. I feel like if you're going to design this entire philosophical argument about how evil disproves God, you ought to define evil. But the problem is it's very difficult to define evil without God. Because in order to have some absolute statement of this is good and this is evil, you need some absolute standard of good and evil, but you're trying to get away from that person. And so the first question for Epicurus would be define evil. How are you going to define it? Is it just what you think? If it's subjective and you don't think God exists because there's evil, but you get to decide what is good and evil, decide everything's good. And now you don't have a problem. And now you can believe in God. But that doesn't work, does it? Because deep down we all know there are some things that are just wrong. And it's not because we decided they're wrong, they're just wrong. And so evil is a real thing, but as we argued a moment ago, in order to have any absolute standard for morality, God is required. Epicurus, he makes some leaps in logic from description to prescription. Essentially, he's saying God is described as being all-loving and all-powerful. Therefore, God ought to do this. So he described God, and then in order to disprove him, he told us what God would do. The problem is, the Bible gives a robust answer to this question. There is evil in the world for a specific reason. It is associated with sin. It is associated with the fall of mankind. The Bible does not say God created a world with evil in and of itself. It is something that is put on the shoulders of mankind as far as bearing responsibility. But the atheist presents this dilemma: love, power. There should be no evil if these two things are true. But dilemmas, that's so narrow. God has more than two attributes. God isn't just all-loving and all-powerful. There are many other attributes to God which have not been factored into the equation, which haven't even been considered in the argument. Take, for example, God is all-knowing. God knows all things, past, present, future, knows how everything should be, could be, would be. God knows absolutely everything. Now, just as an exercise to show the problem with the dilemma, is it not possible that if you make it a trilemma, okay, you add a third thing in there, power, love, knowledge. If you add knowledge, is it possible that there's a reason that we don't know in our finite, limited knowledge that God does know for why he has allowed evil, even though he is loving and powerful? To give a simple illustration, I had a daughter 10 years ago. Good night. It's been 10 years. 10 years ago, who went into the hospital, had a stroke, then had a liver disease. She's fine, she's stable, you wouldn't know. You'd see her running around, you'd never know she had these problems. But at that moment, there were a few times, and many times since actually, with different tests and procedures, where I had to decide, even though I legally have power over the situation, okay, I am the parent, I do have some amount of legal power over my daughter and her health. I love my daughter, and guess what? I still, from her perspective, let those doctors torture her, is probably what it felt like. Pin her down, hold her down, stick her with a bunch of lines. I let them do that because I knew something she didn't. I knew if this didn't happen, she dies. And so just introducing a third aspect shows that a dilemma is oversimplifying God and what his purpose or reasons may be. Evil actually proves God, right? Very basic. If you say, I don't believe in God because there's evil, you just say define evil. If it's subjective, just change your definition then, because you can do that, but they can't because they know it's objective. They know there's right and wrong, but to get right and wrong, you need an eternal, objective person in order to make that law, in order to set the standard for that law, and that's God, and that's who they're trying to disprove from the beginning, so it's kind of uncomfortable, okay? The laws of logic, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because I think it's pretty straightforward. The question is just this: why are the laws of logic the way they are, and are they universal or are they concepts made by man? So I would argue that you cannot say certain things are logical or illogical unless there is an objective mind, similar to the morality argument, right? You can't say right or wrong without objective moral standard. You can't say logical, illogical, reasonable, unreasonable, without an objective mind by which we measure what is reasonable or unreasonable. So if I say I am both A and not A at the same time, fully A and fully not A at the same time, how many think that's possible? No, I mean, we all accept the basic law of non-contradiction, right? That's a contradiction. That doesn't work because there's logical laws that dictate what is proper reason and proper thought. And so the question is, what is the foundation by which you say some things are logical or reasonable? And if it's just because some dude named Aristotle invented them, then let's invent new laws. Why not? Actually, it feels like we're inventing new laws these days, doesn't it? And that's one of the problems, is so much is being done in our culture that violates proper reason. It's being argued from an illogical point of view, but when you reject God and any objective truth standard for what is reasonable or logical or moral, you're left to do whatever you want, even if you can't make sense of why you have the beliefs you have or why you think the things you do. So that's logic. The biblical argument for God. So we're going to end with this, but it's the longest one, so it'll take me about 11 and a half minutes. The biblical argument for God, I'm going to take in 3 different points, okay? Essentially, this argument says the Bible proves God exists, okay? In order to make that argument, we need to show that the Bible requires an all-knowing, eternal, all-powerful author. Basically, we need God to necessarily be the author of the Bible for this argument to work. So if we can show the Bible has to be information from an all-knowing God who is outside of time, then it would prove God exists if it meets that criteria. Y'all with me? I should have put the premises up on here, but I'm sure you've checked out at the cosmological argument. Some of you are still here, right? Thank you. 3 points to the biblical argument for God. First would be prophecy, and this is the one that the apostles used as their primary argument for why they were Christians. Peter, he talks about the more sure word of prophecy. For time's sake, I'm just not reading all the verses. He said we have the prophetic word more fully confirmed when supporting why they believe Jesus Christ is who he said he was. Jesus fulfills a few prophecies. There are far more than what I have on the screen, but I'm just making a point that there are certain things that Jesus did that were prophesied in the Old Testament. And when you add up the odds of a single individual accomplishing all of these things and fitting the criteria for Messiah as laid out in the Old Testament, many of the things completely out of his control if he were just an ordinary man, it becomes reasonable to believe he's not just an ordinary man. So for example, Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. That's Micah 5:2 is where that prophecy is contained. It's written about 600 years prior to his birth. And look, if Jesus is God, it's easy to understand how he could make that happen, knowing the future. However, if Jesus is just an ordinary person and God does not exist, it's very confusing how that lined up, because it's not like Jesus in the womb is kicking Morse code saying, go to Bethlehem. That's out of his human control, if that makes sense. But it just happened to happen, and I think the obvious reason is because God does exist and can see the future and did tell the prophets what he told them. Jesus would present himself as king by riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. He does that on Palm Sunday, which is actually probably Palm Monday, not to ruin your Easter celebration. But the most likely case is that was actually a Monday. So if you hear me say Palm Monday, you know what I'm talking about. Jesus would be crucified in his death. Psalm 22, oddly enough, written 500 years before crucifixion was even invented, where it says they'll pierce my hands and my feet. Crucifixion was invented by the Persians about 500 BC, if memory serves. And Psalms is written about 500 years earlier than that. The form of execution that was popular, not only during the time of David when the psalm is being written, but at the time of Jesus, was stoning. That was the normal form of capital punishment for Jews, was you would stone someone. Crucifixion was unheard of when it was written, and pretty rare for a Jew to be executed by the Roman state in the New Testament time frame, but that happens to Jesus. Jesus would die with the wicked and be buried with the rich. He'd be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. You have all of these different statistics that you could run on what are the likelihoods of someone being betrayed and it happening to be for 30 pieces of silver. Anybody here been betrayed for 30 pieces of silver? All right, so, I mean, it's not that common, right? If you just take... Let's just take a very basic, and I think I did this right. Derek, you're a physicist. If I take the odds of 1 in 10 5 times, it'd be 1 in 100,000, right? Something like that? Okay, yeah, he gave me a thumbs up. And you have a PhD in this, right? Okay, yes, we are. I have good sourcing for this statistic. I think you just add up the zeros is what I think is the case. Well, you multiply. Anyways, if we just take, these 5 prophecies and we say, all right, odds of him being born in Bethlehem, it is not 1 in 10, okay? It's 1 in like 2 million. Like you can actually run statistics and get an idea of how many people are born in Bethlehem compared to the rest of the world. It is not 1 in 10. If it was 1 in 10, 4 or 5 of us should match every one of these, but let's just run them all as 1 in 10, okay? So the odd is 1 in 100,000 for these 5. Let's see how good you are at this. Guess a number between 1 and 100,000. At least you guessed, right? You're the closest. Well, now the 1,000 is the closest. You get the point. And that's for an unrealistic statistical odds in the favor of atheism for 5 of what ends up being about 70. You'll see lists of like 200 to 300 prophecies, and there are 200 to 300 specific references that are prophecies. Some of them are overlapping and prophesying the same thing. And so 60 to 70 specific prophecies. Look, if you run 1 in 10, which it's way worse than that statistically that it'll happen, on 70, you come up with absurd numbers for someone fulfilling all of these. And those are just messianic prophecies. There are some incredible prophecies in the book of Daniel, in the book of Ezekiel, in the book of Isaiah. Jesus makes prophecies that one generation from his time, the temple will be torn down, not one stone will be left upon another. And exactly 38 years later, Jerusalem is annihilated by the Romans and the temple is destroyed. So there are plenty of prophecies in the Bible. Prophecy, though, would require an author who is outside of time, who knows the future, in order to tell the prophets what to write. You can't write the future with this kind of accuracy on your own. You need an author outside of time. Second, I don't know what's happening right now. It just went crazy. Rebuke, whatever. No, we're not going to do that. Did it again. Let's see if it's just that one slide. Nope. Is it happening for you up there? Man, can you not read that fast? Don't move. Okay. It's a pretty slide, so I wanted you to see that. It also says Adobe stock in the background, but don't look too hard. Okay? Argument from advanced knowledge is a second argument. Essentially, this is saying the Bible knows certain things scientifically that it ought not know for its time. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Let me give you the kind of common, apparently with Mary and Joseph in the background, common discoveries that science made that match what the Bible says. Job 26, for example, talks about earth being suspended in nothing. Which is a very strange notion at that time, a couple thousand years ago. But today, you don't need farther explanation. This is kind of, you just take it for granted. Everybody has some kind, I shouldn't say everybody. You can be a flat earther, I still love you, I'm not a flat earther. Most people, 98% of people in America, maybe more, understand the earth is floating through space in material nothingness. Space isn't nothing, but in essentially nothing. And so earth suspended in nothing. Washing hands for germs. You need to understand, there were a lot of scientists who took statements in the Bible to develop their theories. For example, washing hands, right? One doctor in a delivery ward for women giving birth decided to institute washing of the hands when the doctors or medical staff came from dealing with dead bodies to delivering babies. His theory was something was being transported that was invisible. All right? Kooky, right? I mean, that's what they thought. He lost his job, he was fired, and they went back to the way it was, even though the mortality rate got way better for the women. He was still fired and gotten rid of because, invisible things? Come on. And so the Bible was used to support his theory that you should have running water specifically to remove certain things for cleansing and preparation to be around other people. Ocean currents. You all know there are currents in the ocean, okay? Based largely on temperature, okay? Is what drives a lot of these currents. The person who discovered ocean currents, a long time ago now, went looking because of Psalm 8:8, which says there are paths in the seas. And so he went looking and he found them. Light rays for communication. Job 38, there's this statement, I should have put this on the screen, which basically says, can you send lightnings from here to there to tell them, something along those lines, to deliver a message for you. Which is really interesting that energy sent from one person to another to deliver a message is an illustration in Job by God. Finite number of stars and a finite size for the universe, right? He counts the number of stars, calls them all by name. There's a finite number of stars. At the time Psalms was written, that was not the dominant view. The idea that the universe is finite in size, it is not infinite, certainly not the view in the ancient world, but it was the view biblically. All right. Unfortunately, I am going to skip that for time's sake, but it's cool. Final argument, argument from historical events. There are so many events that could be discussed. You see mountains of evidence for everything, historically speaking. Not for I shouldn't say for everything. There are some minor things that happen in the Bible that we just haven't found the tent for, right? Because they literally had a tent in the desert and we haven't found it. For all the big events, Tower of Babel. Found the tower. City's called Eridu. Look it up. It's very fascinating. Tower of Babel. Joseph in Egypt. Israel in Egypt. The Exodus from Egypt. Existence of Mount Sinai. Conquest of the Promised Land. Kings, as far as like David, Solomon. You can go through the Bible and you can find archaeologically a lot of verification for the things that are said. But it's hard to argue that against the idea that the chief event, the prominent event the Bible discusses historically is the resurrection. And this is where, if true, you go from this large idea of the universe needed a creator, the creator is concerned with mankind when it comes to design and purpose, and then this is a moral being because he's the standard for morality. And then you go down to this is a reasonable being, has a mind. We base laws of logic off of this being. You get down to the Bible being the Word of God. And if it's the Word of God of the Bible being the God who exists. And then very specifically, Jesus Christ being God in flesh, if indeed what he claimed or who he claimed he was can be verified historically in his conquering of death. Dr. Gary Habermas wrote what's considered the best work on the resurrection. I should know what it's called. It's probably called The Resurrection, to be honest. So look up Dr. Gary Habermas. He developed what's called the limited facts approach to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And he argues it so well. I mean, some of the top atheist philosophers in the world, like the late Anthony Flew, abandoned atheism due to the argument of the resurrection, specifically made by Habermas. Anyways, here are some things we know historically, that when you take the historical details and you put them all on the table, it is near absurd to come to a conclusion other than Jesus rose from the dead. In a normal class, this is 5 hours, and so here it is in 5 minutes. Jesus died by crucifixion at the hands of the Romans. That's solid historically. We actually have more statements about Jesus dying by crucifixion than almost any other event in ancient antiquities. Lots of sourcing inside the Bible, and then 5 sources outside the Bible. The first time someone denies Jesus died by crucifixion, 600 years later, you know who it is? 600 years should give you a hint. Yep, Muhammad, the Quran. 600 years later, that's the first denial that we have historically that Jesus died by crucifixion. 2, the disciples sincerely believed he rose from the dead and appeared to them. Whether or not he did, they thought he did. People say you die for a lie all the time. Yeah, but you don't die for known lies. You don't die for something you know is wrong. You don't suffer and let them skin you alive or burn you or crucify you for something you know you should just deny because you made it up. So someone could say, well, they tricked the disciples. Whatever, set that aside for a moment. The disciples think he rose from the dead. Okay? They thought he did. Whether or not he did, they thought that he did. Paul converts. This is actually something undisputed, even in your kind of mainstream atheist, someone like Bart Ehrman. This is undisputed. Paul is a persecutor of the church, converts and becomes one of the leaders in the church. Why? I mean, Paul gives his reasons why. He says Jesus appeared to him as well. You then have James, the half-brother of Jesus, who was a skeptic unbeliever who converts and then dies for his faith. You have an empty tomb, and there's very little argument about the empty tomb. Most people agree the tomb was empty. Every major theory that's been presented by atheists have the tomb as empty. Because if the tomb wasn't empty, it would be really easy for the Romans or the Jews to just go grab the body and stop the whole thing. But that's never an argument. That's never a claim. That's never a rebuttal. It's never the Christians say he rose from the dead. But look over here. He's dead. That'd be the easiest response in the book. They don't use it because the tomb is empty. Jesus' burial story is trustworthy. The inclusion of famous people, Sanhedrin, like Joseph of Arimathea, if you're making up a story, you don't include a figure that everybody would know of and be able to ask if it was actually the case or not. If you're making something up, I don't say, Pastor Dave told me. You could all go ask Pastor Dave. I would say, Martin Jones. You might know a Martin Jones. I don't know. Anybody know a Martin Jones? All right, I'm safe. You can't confirm or deny that you don't know Martin. If you're making something up, you don't use someone who everybody could just go figure out if you're lying about them in your story. Broken Roman seal, never denied historically. They put, Roman police tape over the tomb. It's a little more serious than police tape, but they put Roman police tape over the tomb, and so nobody was legally allowed to enter the tomb. Roman guards disappear. There's a guard set at the tomb. The guards go AWOL. In Rome, if you abandoned post or if you fell asleep, this helps illustrate it. Roman law for a soldier on duty, if you fell asleep on duty, there are many things they could do, including set you on fire. When your commanding officer can say you're lazy and just burn you to death on the spot, you tend to behave. So we have Roman soldiers disappear. Large stone was removed. Stone weighed 4,000 pounds. That would be an average upper class. Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, he would be Sanhedrin, so he'd be upper class. This is an average upper class size stone for the first century. Large stone is removed, and then the grave clothes are left behind at the tomb of Jesus. There is debate whether or not the Shroud of Turin is that clothing. The Shroud of Turin went like this. Started out great, then had some problems, but is actually rebounding, and they've actually solved some of those problems, so I am undecided right now if the Shroud of Turin is the burial clothes of Jesus. If you want to talk about that in Q&A, we can. But when you take these 10 statements, and you can try this in Q&A if you'd like, you take these 10 statements, and the theory that makes the most sense by far is he rose from the dead. He even says he's going to do this, right? Jesus himself said, I'm going to go down to Jerusalem, I'm going to die, and 3 days later, I'm going to rise. He tells them multiple times this is going to happen, and then it happens, and it's amusing to see how, skeptics try to respond to this. I kid you not, these are published ideas. Maybe Jesus had a twin brother. This is a real theory, okay? Maybe Jesus had an identical twin brother, and after the crucifixion, he and a group of people overwhelmed the guards, broke into the tomb, stole the body, folded the clothes. That's always a fun one when you realize John's comment when he sees the empty tomb is, the clothes are there and they're folded. So they go in, they steal the body, but they undress him first, fold his clothes, because that's what Mom told you to do, and then left the tomb with the body, and then his twin brother, sometimes identified as Jude, went around and tricked everybody. It gets a little more difficult, though, because when he appears to them in the upper room, he walks through walls, set that aside for a moment, and let's just say they're like super delusional and confused because the twin brother's standing there. However, Thomas does something very specific, right? What does Thomas do? Yeah, he wants to feel the holes, which means Jude has to be crucified, at least have the holes punched in his hand and in his side, so he's got to spear himself in the side and recover in 48 to 72 hours. Any doctors in the room? Gouged with a spear straight through the side, punched through both legs with a nail, both hands with a nail, and you need to be walking around, functioning in 3 days. Unlikely, okay? And he ascended to heaven. Jetpacks is what I'm thinking, is the most likely scenario for that one. That's one of the worst theories. I will give him that. That's one of the more far-fetched theories. The other theories are like, well, maybe dogs ate it. Okay, what? Maybe dogs ate it. Like, they got the stone to move, and then they folded the clothes? Like, in what world is this? But we could talk about that. And that's from John Dominic Crossan in the Jesus Seminar, which is deceptively named. Anyways, Jesus said he was going to do that. He's going to die. He's going to rise again. Look, Jesus believed the Bible was the Word of God. Jesus claimed to be God. And I'm thinking if there's an individual who can be like, I'm going to go down to Jerusalem, die, and 3 days later I'm going to rise, and he does, he probably knows better than me, right? Especially when everything else, the existence of the universe, the design of the universe, the existence of morality, proper reason and logic, everything requires God to be there anyways. And Jesus is saying, I'm him, I fulfill all these prophecies, and I'm going to go die and rise from the dead just to make it crystal clear that I'm able to accomplish what I said I could and that I am who I said I am. And so I think we can be fairly confident in our faith. I think we can be fairly confident that God exists. If you're here and you disagree with me, that's fine. I am happy to talk about that. If you are here and you want to give your own sermon, I invite you to create an event and invite people to it and give that sermon. As we move into Q&A, these are just some ground rules. You are welcome to disagree with me, share your disagreement. I'm happy to go back and forth on disagreements, that's fine. If you want more details about something, that's fine. There are arguments I didn't talk about. I did not talk about the ontological argument, the transcendental argument, and many other arguments for the Bible itself being accurate. But I am happy to talk if you disagree or if you just have clarification. But my point was this, when we move to Q&A, I would like cues, okay? Sometimes people are like, I have a question, and then they give a 5-minute speech. And that's just not a good use of the time, all right? The purpose now is for questions to be answered. So hopefully this was at least interesting. It was meant to be very fast-paced and kind of an introduction to here are a lot of the different proofs that are out there. Any one of these could be hours and hours of study. And if you want more materials on any one of these, I'm happy to share some ideas with you. If you want to talk religions, Thursday night we start that. I'm going to invite Mason to come up with me for the Q&A time. Mason, most of you know Mason because you go to church here. Mason's the singer, so when I answer questions, I will be speaking. When Mason answers questions, he will sing the response to you, is what I've decided. I thought it'd be fun for you. Yeah, no, Mason's been several years now doing apologetic stuff with me, so he's got a lot of good information as well. Do we have a runner? Are you going to run? She'll probably walk? Okay. If you're online, I should say this. If you're online and have questions, I am watching the Facebook comment section. Or maybe Andrea's watching the Facebook. You're not? Okay. Or if you get on YouTube, I guess we could do it that way too. Nah, just put it on Facebook if you have a question. All right. Does anybody have a question? No? All right. Thank you guys for coming. All right. We do have...
So with the moral argument and the example that comes to our mind of ultimate evil, we think of the Holocaust, and as you said, we all know it's wrong to put children in ovens. The flip side, so in Joshua, the Jews are razing cities and killing everyone, men, women, and children. So how do we square that? We have this, God's law written on our heart says it's wrong to kill children. God tells the Jews to kill children. Thank you.
Correct. No, that's very good. Mason was ready to sing a song about that particular question. Yeah, the conquest of the Promised Land. When they go in, it's not all of them. There are a few tribes specifically that they are ordered to kill man, woman, and child, annihilate everybody. Jericho is one example. They're told to kill absolutely everybody, leave no survivors. So let me give some big picture framework for how I'm answering this, and then I'll tell you some theories behind the specifics, if that works. The first thing would be the reason why we are told we cannot murder is because we do not understand how to enact justice properly in a way that creates perfect outcomes. Okay, in comparison to God, there we go, who is the all-knowing judge, perfect moral figure in the universe who gets to decide these things, and so. I would say first, we have God who has the right, and this is brought out in the book of Job, to give life or to take life. He owns all life, and so he has the right to stop or to prolong life at any moment because he's ultimately the owner of life. And so if he deems something necessary or reasonable, then he has the prerogative to do that, whereas we do not. So I am not the giver of John's life, okay? John's sitting over here, okay? I do not give and take away John. I don't have ownership over this world or over John, whereas God would have complete sovereign ownership to where he would have the right to take or to give or to take in any example. Let me talk, though, specifically. One of the more interesting theories, which gets into one question will result in many other questions, but let me just give you the broad theory. There are a few tribes, if you're familiar with Genesis chapter 5 and 6, and the topic of the Nephilim. Have you studied this particular topic? There is one theory that says essentially the Nephilim are essentially unnatural offspring. They're like a distorted version of mankind, okay? And one of the interesting things, and I'm not sold yet either direction, but one of the interesting things is the only tribes who that's commanded to are the ones that are identified as Nephilim or Rephaim, which is just another word for it. Those are the only tribes that are told man, woman, and child. And there is a statement in the Old Testament that I would have, you'd need to text me for me to, I don't have it memorized, about Rephaim, they do not rise, like they do not, they're not eternal, they don't have a soul. And so there's an interesting topic concerning what is unique about those tribes, and that's one of the unique things is that those are the only ones that are identified with the tag Nephilim or Rephaim, and they are told annihilate them entirely. And one of the mistakes is they don't. There are several where they just let them live, and then they end up corrupting and causing Israel to rebel against God quite often. When it comes to the judgment in general, though, I mean, God gives them 400 years to repent. They're butchering their kids. They're burning them at the altars. It's a very evil group of people. It's only the children that really raise the question. The adults are very evil in Canaan. And God gives them 400 years to change their ways. They don't, and so God enacts justice. That's just a possible response to why it's everybody, all right? I did write it's hard to condense. I did write a 30-page paper on that, though, so if you text me, I'll send it to you. Other questions? Unless you want to sing? No? Okay.
I'm going to kind of piggyback on what he was asking. I wanted you to kind of elaborate how you would defend against someone about the axiological argument, because how you go, I know that everybody sins, but the morality part of it throughout the Bible and as today, we are continuing to do immoral acts and in large numbers. So how can that continue to be an argument for morality? I mean, I know we sin, but the big morality, it seems like it's getting larger and more prominent. So how do we...
Like people are getting more evil?
Well, kind of, but what we consider moral, people are now considering it the norm.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's irrelevant,
I don't want to say anything to
sense.
defend anybody, or offend anybody, So how would you straighten your argument to someone that uses that as, how can God exist when we're being so immoral, if that's a universal? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
So you're saying good is called evil, evil is called good, like it's all getting confused today?
Yes. I just don't want to put any terms to it.
Yeah. If a group of people call something that's good evil or evil good, it's completely irrelevant to the argument. The argument is it has nothing to do with what people think or say or do. It is, and then to the extent that we understand it, we can be moral. So for example, does that make sense? Right and wrong is just the way it is, black and white, eternal, grounded in the nature of God, which does not change. If society changes and confuses itself and loops around and has all these different opinions, it's completely irrelevant to the reality that right and wrong is grounded in God, and our goal is simply to know what that is based on who God is, and God doesn't change. So If society calls something evil that is good, then they're wrong. So I guess I don't know what...
So I guess the biggest, kind of like the safest example is sacrificing of like children, like throughout the biblical times, and sacrifice of children to different gods, to protect a tribe or to not cause like prey to come upon them, or if they had special
appease
needs.
the gods.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like even today, we continue to sacrifice our children. I mean, and most people would call that a moral argument, that that's not correct, but we continue to, it's like a continuation throughout all time, and it seems
Almost all time.
well, okay, I didn't know that, but
Yeah.
like, it seems like it's getting bigger and like the more norm, so can you still consider it a moral argument?
Yeah, I think that just proves the point.
Okay.
I said almost because it started perfect and soon after became a problem. So there was a time without the issues. I think the biblical the biblical stance is that it gets worse at the end. Sinful people don't suddenly correct themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything about that?
I mean, Peter says that pretty straightforward, doesn't he? That good will be called evil and evil will be called good
Yeah.
as we go forward. I think the thing that we need to key in on is that, like he was saying, that it's objective, it's outside of the person who's doing the action. So the moral side of it, morality, what's good and what's bad, exists independently of us and the choices that we make, right? So that's what you were going back to.
Yeah, I mean, if everybody in the world started killing their kids, it just means everybody's evil.
Yeah.
It wouldn't change anything about the standard. It might result in us using different illustrations to explain why morality exists. So if everybody decides sleeping around is okay, even if I think it's wrong, maybe I won't use that example because I'm looking for an example that they will understand is wrong, like putting kids in ovens, which is why I go to an extreme, because pretty much everybody agrees on this one. So the examples could change that I use with an unbeliever, but the reality of right and wrong will stay concrete, whether or not everybody's doing it or nobody's doing it. Yeah. Other questions?
Sorry, I didn't sing.
Someone ask him what the core doctrines of the faith is.
Okay.
We believe in God the Father. He could sing that song.
I don't want to.
So you just, back to two previous, you said that the Nephilim was in the
I
tribes.
knew this was going to happen the moment I brought up the Nephilim.
Said-
Yes,
No,
continue.
I just, so
Yeah. No, you're okay. Go for it.
I thought, and I'm probably wrong, that all the Nephilim was destroyed, but if not all the tribes that you're saying that had Nephilim in them was destroyed, man, woman, and child, does the Nephilim still exist then? And is that where the evil comes from? Because I always was under the impression that it was just the giants that were the Nephilim, not just any tribe or people.
Well,
Yeah, let me talk Nephilim specifically, and then, Genesis, sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, took wives unto themselves. These became the mighty men, the men of renown. We transliterate. Giant is not really the full meaning behind that. I know everybody associates them with giants. Here's the Nephilim theory, okay, that I think has a shot at being correct. I'm not sold entirely, but I think has a shot at being correct. Nephilim is the devil's original way to corrupt the seed of the woman, because the one who crushes Satan, right, Genesis 3 prophecy, will be the seed of the woman, so it's an attempt to corrupt the seed of the woman, results in the flood, which annihilates all but Noah and his family, who are called pure. And it's a physical word that is used to describe him, that he is without blemish. It's a physical description. And then after the flood, we see it happening again in the promised land. and God tells them with those specific tribes, kill man, woman, and child, get rid of all of them, just like the flood. Look, this is actually what confuses me the most. Everybody talks about the conquest or the Israel wars in the Old Testament, and I'm like, the flood. God drowned hundreds of millions of people, killed them all. There's one person, they said, if you can accept Genesis 1:1 and the flood, you should have no other problems. If you can accept God can speak and create the entire universe and can wipe out everybody in the world but Noah and his family justly, there should really be no more questions or struggles, because those are two of the monumental events. Do I think there are Nephilim today? I have no clue. We are given a statement in Jude and 2 Peter that there might be something like that happens again in the end times. I don't want to speculate too much because I don't think it's useful today to speculate, are there Nephilim walking around? I don't think it's useful necessarily when we're given the mission of, go share the gospel. But it's possible, I suppose. But there's certainly Nephilim after the flood. I would like to point out, though, Goliath is identified as Rephaim, which is Nephilim. And so that's why people think they might have been a little bigger. It's not so much the word, but the existence of Goliath, and he being identified as one of them. Is that why there's evil?
That's what I was
Yeah,
gonna say.
you go for it.
So I think as far as the question of why, is that why there's so much evil in the world, I think it's important to remember that man is fully and completely capable of the utmost evil, really. Like we don't need Nephilim to do terrible things.
Or demons.
Yeah,
or
we're
anything.
fully capable of that.
Yeah.
So that's really all I wanted to say.
Other question? Are you watching? I don't need to watch. Okay.
Hi. So going back to a basic definition of Nephilim, can you define that for me?
Well, that's
because
the debate.
I always say fallen angels.
Yeah, that's the debate. In the theory I have been explaining, the Nephilim are not the fallen angels. They are the unnatural offspring of the fallen angels who take material form and the daughters of men, which would be women, okay? So the fallen angels are not the Nephilim. The Nephilim are the result in that theory of fallen angels. So when it says the sons of God, which in the Old Testament is every other time a reference to angels, all right? The bara Elohim, bara Elohim, yeah. No, it's not bara Elohim. I'm not going to try to do Hebrew right now. The sons of God, for example, in Job, it says, all the sons of God shout for joy when the foundations of the earth are laid. That happens on day 3. There's no people yet. There's only angels. So that's one example of where sons of God is a reference to angels. So if sons of God are angels and daughters of men, daughters of Adam, so that's pretty straightforward. There's no debate there. If they have offspring and they are identified as this different class of things called Nephilim, then the fallen angels are not the Nephilim, but the Nephilim are a result of the fallen angels. Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds really bizarre. Just understand, angels take material form all the time. In the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah, 2 good angels, they try to sexually do things with those angels in Sodom and Gomorrah because they take physical form. Yeah.
Dislocates Jacob's hip.
Yeah, yeah, wrestles with an angel. I knew we'd be on Nephilim the whole night after that question.
I knew it's because you said it.
I just need to do a
You
night
said
on the
Nephilim,
different
and I was
theories
like, we're
behind
done.
the
It's
Nephilim. Right over here. Is this about the Nephilim? Oh, cool. All right. I don't mind the Nephilim. I have classes on the Nephilim. It's hard to give you all the theories and the strengths and weaknesses behind them quickly,
If you're talking to an atheist, don't be like, so here's the deal.
So here's the deal.
Giants.
Bunch of demons came down. You have to be able to develop the theory if you're going to use it. Yeah.
Well, I think that it's safe to say that it was a pretty violent time anytime there was a clash between Israel and whoever was trying to occupy them. And in Ezra, he told everybody to put their foreign wives away. I don't think they were Nephilim. I felt bad for the women. I asked God, hey, is this real? Because there were times when they were trying to clean the bloodline, and they weren't demons necessarily. They were just not pure Israelis.
But the messianic line.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although that's not a statement just at the time of Ezra or Nehemiah. I mean, the whole idea of not taking foreigners as wives or husbands, but you get what I'm saying, is based on them leading them astray in serving false gods, and that literally happens all through the Old Testament. They go, they take wives, they lead them astray. Sorry, women. It's not you, it's just that the people who were brought in were almost always women, okay, because the men died in war. So when there was a mixing from the outside, it was almost always women. If the men had come in, it would have done the same thing. They had their false gods, they had their ways, to the point where they got them to sacrifice kids. Yeah, I mean, they got Israel to join in with them on those things, to their false gods. So that's another key reason why they said, get rid of all of them, don't mix, don't mingle. There was also a lot of protection for foreigners, actually. You weren't allowed to just kill any foreigner. I mean, foreigners had certain rights in Israel, had certain access, deserved certain treatment, but there were strict laws against marrying the pagans because they'd lead them astray, and it happened dozens of times. Other questions? Going once. Any other questions on the Nephilim? Yeah, Mason. Okay. Well, if you don't have any more questions.
Nothing online either.
Yeah, if you posted on YouTube, that was
I'll
your
check
fault.
YouTube real quick. I'll check it real fast.
We said Facebook, so
It's okay.
so thank you guys for being here. I hope you enjoyed the topic and got a little bit of encouragement. You're welcome to join us on Thursday if you'd like to, 6 o'clock. We'll start World Religions. It'll be a 6-month class, and that'll be down this hallway at the end. So thank you all for being here.